Hello and welcome to Semantic Reactions, the official podcast of the Institute of General Semantics. My name is Ben Hauk, and I'm pleased to be able to introduce the 34th installment in our ongoing series. For our June 2025 episode, we are pleased to welcome back IGS trustee and past president Martin H. Levinson to talk about the recent publication of his latest book, Sensible Thinking 3: The Adventure Continues. In conversation with IGS president Lance Strate, Marty talks about general semantics, learning and education, and the process of writing, as well as topics such as PTSD, antisemitism, politics, and satire. Let's hear what they have to say.
Welcome to another episode of Semantic Reactions, the official podcast of the Institute of General Semantics. Pleased to welcome back to our podcast Marty Levinson. Marty is the past president and trustee of the Institute of General Semantics and the author of quite a few books and many more items, but that includes a Continuing Education Guide to General Semantics. What was the drug book again?
The drug problem, a new view using a general semantics approach.
Okay. And of course, your Practical Fairy Tales book, which has proven to be quite popular. And then we have now 3 volumes of Sensible Thinking, and we're pleased to welcome you back to talk about the newest addition to the series, Sensible Thinking 3: The Adventure Continues.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the invitation to be back, and I enjoyed writing the book, and I thank the Institute for publishing the book, all 3 of the books. It's now a trilogy of sensible thinking. So I'm hoping people who are interested in being more sensible thinkers will try to get or take a look at the latest book.
Well, that's great. And of course, it's a great privilege for the Institute to be able to publish your work, Marty. And as you bring it up as a trilogy, you know, and things come to mind like The Lord of the Rings, 3 trilogies on the part of Star Wars. I think Robert Anton Wilson had a trilogy or so. If this is a trilogy, then do readers have to start with the first book and read them in order?
No, they don't have to start with the first book. All the books are basically framed the same way, and they're standalone chapters. So in any of the books, you can read any of the chapters without reading previous chapters to get information on what might be interesting or what you need to know for the subsequent chapter. No, you can read any of the chapters that interest you, and I suggest people don't read the chapters in order. Look at the table of contents, and whatever you see there that really interests you, start there. And if you see it's something that's really not interesting, go that to the end, because sometimes what's not interesting, once you start reading it, becomes interesting. But no, these are all standalone chapters in all of the books.
Okay, so Sensible Thinking is kind of like your brand in that sense.
Yes, I guess that's an interesting way to put it. I kind of like that. Sensible thinking. I just think it's such a sensible title to get people interested in it, but I'll find out if from others. I have to wait for feedback. That's in my head, thinking that way.
Yeah, and of course, sensible thinking presupposes thinking to begin with. Is that right?
That's true. And it also presupposes that I suppose we're not necessarily prone to sensible thinking. My thought on that is that, and this includes me, I'm not the paradigm of a sensible thinker in all things. In many things I'm not. Like many people, I have my irrationalities. I mean, if there were no irrationalities, there'd be no literature.
Mhm.
So we'd all be like science books. We'd all be doing things like Dr. Spock on Star Trek. Exactly, boom, boom, boom. It's the irrationalities actually that make people in many ways interesting. But for our own irrationalities, if you're making decisions that are important decisions, buy a car, get married, house, even smaller decisions, whatever, you may want to think about being more sensible in making those decisions.
And what do you mean by sensible? What makes something sensible?
Well, that's a good point. And obviously, since I'm being published by the Institute of General Semantics, and my interest is in general semantics, I'm sort of equating, in many ways, general semantics with sensible thinking. It's sort of a hook to get people more involved in the term general semantics, which, in terms of hooks, I think is important. You've heard this story before, but maybe some people listening to this have. But if you haven't,
It bears repeating.
It bears repeating. Thank you. So I came to general semantics almost 50 years ago. I don't look my age, but who knows? But anyway, I came to general semantics almost 50 years ago. I was living in the city in Greenwich Village. At the time, you really could afford to live there on a school teacher salary. And there was a course, a continuing education course being offered at Cooper Union entitled How to Improve Your Thinking and Communicating Ability. And I thought, well, I could probably use that. And just as importantly, I was a junior high school counselor at the time. I thought, well, maybe I'll pick up some tips on so I can tell that to the kids. And this is the way you can, because they definitely needed ways to improve their thinking and communicating ability. Many of them were failing out of school and getting into trouble. So I took the course, and the course really should have been entitled General Semantics 101, because the person teaching the course, Harry Maynard, was trying to get the message across which was really trying to teach general semantics. The book he assigned for the course was People in Quandaries, which of course you know of, is a wonderful book. It's sort of a good introduction to general semantics, and the Institute is still publishing it. It was originally published in 1946. But in any event, I don't think I would have taken a course not knowing general semantics titled General Semantics 101. So, so it's important. So titles of books and also even covers of books, but titles and how you frame things are important to get people interested in what you want them interested in.
Mm-hmm. And I would say that your equation of general semantics with sensible thinking, with all due respect to the principle of non-identity, that equation is a good one, and certainly happy to entertain that. So sensible thinking equates to general semantics, and then folks who are looking for an easy entry into general semantics, who might be a little daunted by, say, Science and Sanity, can find that in any one of the three books that bear that title?
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, because each of the chapters, some of them explain or try to explain general semantics formulations and ideas just as general semantics formulations and ideas. More of the chapters really, or most of the chapters, use general semantics formulations and ideas to examine certain things. So I'm really a student of history. I do a lot of history lectures. And you can really look at history through lenses of general semantics formulas and ideas, through dating. Things change over time. And so, you apply dates to particular events in history and see how those events over time changed. Indexing, where things, general semantics principle, where you don't look at sort of the general category, but you look at more specific items within that category. So what you do is you take these sort of formulations and ideas of general semantics and apply them. You can apply them personally, professionally, looking at historical issues or social issues, and it's sort of a wide-ranging toolkit for understanding lots that's going on in the world.
Well, and I note that this third volume has a dedication to Stephen Alter. Wondering if you'd like to tell us a little bit about that?
I would. So Stephen Alter is a psychologist. Like many people, or maybe some people, I've been in therapy. with a few psychologists. He's one of them, and I felt, and we developed a friendship in addition to a professional relationship. And I felt I received many insights over the years through my contact with him. So I dedicated the book to him because of those insights that I've gotten into myself through our relationship.
Okay. And you start off the book with why general semantics, but you have why in quotes.
Yeah, that's what happened is,
I know, I mean, you have general in quotes.
general in quotes. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. That's true. Yeah, because I think most people are familiar with the term semantics. Actually, as you probably agree with, the general semantics might not have been the best title for the subject we're all interested in, but it was the person who really formulated the field was Alfred Korzybski, who was a polymath. He was an engineer, a philosopher, a mathematician, a Polish nobleman, lots of things. And he came to this country. English was not his first language. He spoke a number of languages. And he chose general semantics, I think, based on the term, I'm not going to pronounce this correctly, but I think it's the Greek term semenin, which means meaning. So it was kind of general meaning, and sort of an overall way of finding meaning in things and evaluating things. And when you explain it that way, people will go, well, that's interesting. But at first blush, if you're not around next to them to explain it, people will think, oh, they'll just see the semantics part and say, well, I know semantics about word meanings. I took a course in semantics at college. But in fact, general semantics goes way beyond that. And then often I will have to explain what the title is and more about the subject. So the title itself is not great if you have to explain just the title itself. But in any event, but here we are. Why general semantics is sort of I hope, a catchy way to get people more interested in learning about some of the ideas and formulations of the field. And I try to do that in a quick and hopefully easy manner. So in a few pages, you'll get sort of a general overview of what's involved in general semantics.
And it is general.
Which is one of the things I love most about it. Today so many people are specialists and they drill down into whatever field they're in. So if you're with these folks, socially, often it's like, okay, the evening's going to be on what they want because that's really what they're interested in. But if you really are a person who has wide-ranging interests or want to learn about different things, general semantics was what is and has been wonderful for me because I can take the interests I have in things and examine them more methodically and I think more deeply through the ideas and formulations of general semantics. I actually am not just reading about something, say, oh, that's interesting, but I could say, oh, well, I wonder how this changed over time. Or I wonder if I'm missing the bigger picture or by not looking at the smaller things that are happening through indexing? Or am I just thinking I know everything there is about this subject without thinking, etc., that whatever I know, there's always more to know. Whatever any expert in any field knows, that person knows a fraction of what could be known in that field. So also it sort of empowers you as a person, maybe not an expert in a particular field, to learn more. You're not intimidated by, oh, I have to be an expert to really find out about things or learn about things. Of course, today with AI, it's much easier, actually.
Well, that's certainly an interesting point. I was wondering, I mean, one of the kind of case studies that come up in Sensible Thinking 3 is on PTSD, which is certainly a very significant area of concern. Does general semantics help people in dealing with trauma and its effects?
Well, that's a good question. And let me sort of have kind of a complex, comprehensive answer here. So PTSD, the person who really, in general semantics, who did much work in this field was a fellow during World War II, Douglas Kelly. He was in the
Douglas,
Army.
I'm sorry.
Was it Douglas? Am I getting that right? Kelly, was it right? I think that's who he is. It's been a while since I did that chapter. Certainly Kelly, but I have to go back. I'll go back to that. But anyway, he was the one in World War II who used principles of general semantics with soldiers who they didn't call it PTSD back then. I wrote an article a while back on the derivation of the term, and it started. I think they started with in the Civil War they called it soldier's heart because I guess cardiac things and stuff like that. In World War I, it was called shell shock. I think they might have actually continued to use that term for a while. It finally morphed in the 60s, I think, into PTSD, but it's kind of, it's not that hard to understand. I mean, people go into battle and you're traumatized because just, guns go off, people are getting killed around you. I mean, who wouldn't be traumatized by that?
Yeah, yeah.
So he developed a general semantics way of treating these people,
That
and it
was
seemed that
Douglas Kelly, by the way.
it was
I
Douglas
just checked
Kelly.
it. Douglas Kelly, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. He did wonderful work. He wrote a little about it, and sadly, didn't continue doing that after he left the army. He just and didn't continue writing about that. So that was too bad. But in any event, so I thought that was interesting, and I actually did some work myself in the area because one of the people who I met at one of our AKML, this is the big lectures that the Institute sponsors every year.
The Alfred Korzybski Memorial Lecture.
Yeah, and when is that happening this year?
October 3rd, followed by a symposium on the 4th and 5th, the theme being discourse, dialogue, and democracy this year.
And it will be held at the?
In New York City, in Manhattan, at the Players in Gramercy Park.
Which is a beautiful venue, and I'm looking forward to being there, and I'm sure everyone else who will participate, and if anyone listening to this podcast, I highly recommend coming to that event. But in any event, I met someone there who was a veteran who was working out here on Long Island, where I'm living, and he was actually counseling veterans who had PTSD. And he invited me there a number of times to work with those veterans with him using general semantics to help alleviate some of the stress and the poor ways these folks were reacting in civilian life because of the PTSD. And so using some of Kelly's recommendations and just sort of my own thoughts, because I was a counselor for many years in the public school system, I also found that general semantics, I thought it was helpful. And from the feedback I received from some of the people we were working with, they thought it was helpful. So, and also Alfred Korzybski himself, was a veteran of World War I. And he wrote about some of the PTSD he suffered, like some of thinking back when he was in New York, every time a plane would fly over, he would want to run for cover. This was in the 1920s, way after the war. And it was because during the war, when planes would come over, they would, drop things that weren't very good. And so he would sort of associate that. And so he had to think in his own mind. And there were certain things I described in the book where he became less and less traumatized by things that shouldn't be traumatic. I mean, most people aren't going to think that a plane flying over is a danger to them.
Well, I think after 9/11, at least some folks in New York have experienced some of that.
Well, that's true. But I mean, if you think that on a daily basis, not good, I think.
Yeah.
Also, statistically, again, in general semantics, I think helps you think in a statistical manner because science is important in general semantics, scientific method. And, so often people who, I think, who have fears, fear of flying is fairly, I think, commonly known fear. And so do people that, well, I'll go in an airplane, the plane will crash, I have no control, well, this will be terrible. And there's no control. I mean, that's, I think, a rational piece. But the statistical probability of you getting killed in a plane crash is so infinitesimal. I mean, if you have fear of being killed, we're all going to, I think, die, but maybe not. You never know what's going to happen in the future. But if you really want to be scared of, or thinking that you could control some danger, look both ways before you cross, because you're much more likely to be killed as a pedestrian or in an automobile accident, way more than the infinitesimal chance you'll be killed in a plane crash.
It's interesting because that brings us into the area of risk, which is something that sociologists have studied, and there's a big difference psychologically between risk that people feel they're choosing to take as opposed to risks that are imposed upon them. That's where this anti-smoking campaign, when it was simply that smoking is bad for your health, it wasn't really successful because people were saying, well, that's my choice and, I'll bear the consequences. It wasn't until secondhand smoke became a thing where people are against their will and without a choice subjected to cigarette smoke and its health consequences. That's where that campaign actually met with success and with legislation that resulted in a vast reduction of percentage of people who do smoke.
That's a good point. I know a little bit about that too, because I spent so much of my career in drug prevention.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of always, I felt it was always silly, in drug prevention, we would talk about, what was it, tobacco, alcohol, and drugs.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, alcohol seems like a drug to me. Why are you not including that just as a general drug thing? Well, heroin, oh, terrible heroin, it does such bad things to you, certainly alcohol. Well, if you think about comparing, I'm not saying you should do this, if you took alcohol and heroin, I mean, alcohol, if you're really abusing alcohol, you're doing real damage to your internal organs, cirrhosis, brain damage, etc. With heroin, you'll become constipated. The real danger of heroin is the addiction piece, and it'll make you not want to. It'll take away your will to do things. But internally, alcohol is a much more dangerous drug. But people, don't seem to think. Well, they don't know that because they're not taught that, and also because alcohol is so widespread and it's legal. But anyway, I actually did a chapter in this book actually on alcohol over the looking at alcohol. It was using dating, and it was looking about how Americans view and take in alcohol since we become a country. So we start in the revolution when everyone is drinking. I mean, the Supreme Court, they say, the Chief Justice says, I think, we're only, we could only drink on rainy days. He said, but it's raining somewhere in this country all the time. So that was it. And anyway, so I go through dating where you see how things change from, either decade to decade or over 50-year periods, and how policies change, how drugs we look at. One decade it's not good, next decade the prohibition comes along and we simply say, well, we shouldn't be taking alcohol, it's not a good thing to do. And then that doesn't work, and now alcohol is fairly well accepted. Of course, all drugs are dangerous. One of the things I wrote once about drug legalization. I did something on 100 questions to ask before you legalize a drug, and I gave pros and cons. And of course, the big con for me was if you legalize the drug, and it doesn't work out, can you then not legalize it and put prohibitions on it? And could that even work? So that was something I thought was important.
Mhm. Well, and it's certainly important to take that orientation of what are the actual facts that we're dealing with and trying to evaluate them in an objective fashion.
Yeah, and also ask questions. One of the things I like about general semantics is its emphasis on questioning things, things you take for granted.
Mhm.
Question them. I mean, you can still take it for granted afterwards if you think, but there's something in general semantics, etc. And that is whatever you say about something, whatever you know about something, there is always more to learn, more to know. And I find it, we're all getting up in age, but I find what gives me a lot of, I think that's a inference.
We're
But
not getting any younger, that's for sure.
well, that's true. Although, we may be getting younger in terms of the way we think about things. We may be becoming more flexible. I don't know how flexible you were as a young person. So there's something. But yeah, it's interesting because the questioning is such an important, I find, such an important part of life, and learning. I think as one gets older, physically, you probably won't be. You really are not going to improve a lot of your skills, your endurance and things like that. But learning, you can always improve upon. You can always find out more, I think, and you can always be curious. And I think curiosity, even more than diet in many ways, will help with your longevity.
Uh-huh. Gregory Bateson has a term he coined, deutero learning, like Deuteronomy. It's like,
Yeah,
which is kind of a meta term, learning to learn. It's one thing to learn things, but learning how to learn is, in some ways more important.
I love that term. I never heard of it before. I'm going to now think about it and use it. That's wonderful.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
would you say general semantics fits into that category of learning how to learn?
I definitely would do that. I certainly would think that fit perfectly into that category of learning how to learn. And look, it's not perfect. I mean, nothing is perfect. Even in
Mm.
science, nothing is right. In science,
Yeah.
whatever something in science they come out with, this is the way. It's always the latest of what we know. There's always that little bitty thing there for chance. Some a black swan event thing. Can't. Religion is where you're certain of things, and that's okay. And that's really why comparing science and religion and contrasting, they're two different systems. It's apples and oranges. But yeah, general semantics really really asks you to, and that's why even when I did the chapter, I didn't say what my thoughts are. I come down on legalization, not come down. I'm just saying here are 100 questions to ask, and maybe among those questions you'll find one you hadn't thought of before. And actually, I could have come up with 1,000 questions, but eventually you have to stop if you want to publish something. And also in terms of thinking, you have to stop. I mean, you can't just keep getting information before you make a decision. There are time constraints often with decisions, and you do the best you can. But if general semantics helps you be more open to information that might be relevant to decisions that you might not have looked for if you hadn't actively looked for them and thought, well, maybe there's more to this than I think.
Well, and in talking about learning, I should note that you have had a long career as an educator and working for the New York City Board of Education and a degree at NYU's doctorate degree in NYU's School of Education, studying with, among others, Neil Postman.
That's true. Well, sadly, I didn't really, I guess you could say study. I never took a course with Neil Postman. And really, I so regret that. But what happens is, unlike many people who are experts in general semantics who studied with Neil Postman, and I really envy that, I was in a different department altogether. I was in the department of, I forget what they called it back then. It was educational administration, but it had a longer, fancier title. But basically, there were administrators going there to get doctoral degrees. Many of them EDD degrees, but I went to the PhD because I was more interested in doing research and things like that. But actually, so that's an interesting story about well, you've heard it, but maybe some of the others haven't, about how I met Neil Postman and became somewhat acquainted with Neil Postman. In that, after this Cooper Union course and during it, I became so enamored with general semantics. After 2 sessions, reading People and Quandaries, I thought, this stuff is great. I really, really must find out more about it. So I started reading Hayakawa, because I asked the teacher, Harry Maynard, so what else can I learn? How can I learn more about general semantics? What can I read? So I started reading Hayakawa and some other books and stuff like that. And I was at the time going to Cooper Union pursuing this PhD degree. And I thought, gee, I would love to do a PhD dissertation using general semantics. I wonder how I could do it, because I knew I assumed no one in my department had ever heard of it. Correctly, it turned out. But I went to so how can I interest my advisor to let me do it? And the way I thought, well, if I do an experimental study on something, I might interest him, because he was sort of the only one in our department who knew about computers. The days of mainframe computers at NYU had this huge mainframe computer, and many of the other professors weren't that interested in computers. This was in the real late 70s.
Yeah.
And if I would do an experimental study, it had never been done in my department, he might think, oh, I'll be more flexible on what I'll let Marty do here. So I came up with doing an experimental study. I was a counselor at the time with junior high school students, wherein I would teach a number of groups of the students I was with doing counseling, a general semantics curriculum, which I developed. And I would use with the other number of groups, I was a standard guidance department, guidance-oriented curriculum. And I would use that to measure alienation, which was a psychological term. And there were 3 different factors I used with alienation. And I brought this to him, and he said, well, I don't really understand much about the general semantics piece. I get the alienation part and the other things, but I love the idea of doing experimental study. So if you can find someone here in NYU who's on faculty, who's an expert in that area, I'll greenlight it. And just lucky, I always think luck is a good, well, everyone thinks luck is a good thing. But Neil Postman happened to be at NYU. And when I asked my person teaching the course, when I was asking him who were some people I should look at, he recommended Neil Postman's books. And I'd read a couple of them, and I thought, wow, if I could get Neil Postman on my committee, I'll be able to do this dissertation. So I made an appointment with him, and he graciously consented to do it. And so during the course of the dissertation, when you meet with your advisors, he was the one I met with, and he was the one I really wanted to meet with, because he was so smart. And not only smart in an academic sense, he was smart, I thought, in a practical sense, and had such a great sense of humor that I really, really, really envied people who took his classes, because you could get the benefit of all of it constantly in the class.
Uh-huh. Wow. Well, I wanted to ask you about another chapter in the book. You have one devoted to antisemitism, which has emerged as a really great concern, really over the past, 10, 15 years, in particular, not that it ever quite vanished, but that it just suddenly seems to be, much more apparent. It's certainly here in the United States, where there have been some actual physical attacks going on. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that chapter and about that problem.
Yeah, well, I think you're right about the problem. I mean, it's from what I've seen statistically, it's gotten worse over the last few years, and it's always been there. I mean, it's since, I don't know, Pharaoh, before, but I mean, through the millennium, and you don't have to be an expert in the field, just pick up any book or pick up any book or read articles. I mean, no one's really disagreeing with the fact that anti-Semitism has always been around, and and it has gotten worse. I mean, all the statistics I've been looking at from different organizations show it's been worse. What surprised me, I was reading Bruce Kodish wrote the definitive biography of Alfred Korzybski. I mean, it's a doorstopper of a book, but a good doorstopper. I mean, I like to read, Crime and Punishment. That's a good doorstopper too. So, yeah, so I was familiar with the book. And in that book, there was a chapter, I think it was one chapter, on Korzybski's attitude towards Jews, and lots of it was clearly anti-Semitic. I mean, not even, let me think, is that anything? No, grossly anti-Semitic. I mean, Kodish has letters in there where Korzybski is chastising Jews as Jews for being, taking advantage. This was back in Poland where he's from, taking advantage of the local citizenry and this and that. All Jews do this. They're a bad race of people. And I print some of the letters in the thing. And the reason I include that in the chapter was because he was such a virulent anti-Semite in his younger years. And then when he came to this country in, I guess, the late teens, during World War I, I think he went to Canada. And then he came here either after the war or shortly during the war. He was involved in negotiations, munitions negotiations, but then he stayed in the United States. Mm-hmm. And I guess here he became, he was influenced by other people other than the anti-Semitic views that he was getting back in the old country. And he did what textbook general semantics, new information came to him, and he thought, new ways of seeing things. And he actually changed to become what could be argued, and I think I think Kodish argues this quite well, not anti-Semitic, but philo-Semitic. Uh-huh. He actually became more of, and he actually spoke at a couple of Jewish organizations, and he was arguing to help them with whatever their goals were. So I included that, no way to trash Korzybski, but to show in general semantics, when you think, this person has this particular view, and you'll always think of that person through that view. Mm-hmm. But in fact, we all change, even with a view as horrific, in my opinion, as anti-Semitism. You think, that person's an anti-Semite. There'll always be an anti-Semite. Well, in fact, here's a specific instance in life where that wasn't the case. So you just don't know what will happen in the future. And branding people and thinking that's the label they should walk around with for the rest of their life may not be a good idea, may not be realistic, and also it may discourage you from introducing them to other ideas because this is the way you think they'll always be. So that's pretty much why I included that chapter in the book.
And given that, on the other side, that is what led Korzybski to change his view, and how does that relate to general semantics? That is, how can we use general semantics to combat prejudice and stereotyping?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, he met some people who, I think when he talked about it, simply had good arguments against it, and he did more reading. Here, I guess maybe back in Poland, you didn't have the information that was sort of anti-semantic, where here he did, and he did more reading and and he became, I think, maybe there weren't that many educated Jews back in the old country, but here there were. And I think he was quite taken with people who he felt had knowledge and could also, I suppose, counter any arguments. I don't know if they would bring them up directly, but I think he was, and who had written about anti-Semitism. And I think when he was exposed to the information and when he was meeting people who were not fitting his stereotype of what he thought a Jewish person should be, it led him to change his opinion.
Well, and of course, I'm sure that the fact that he idolized Albert Einstein played a role in all of this. But then how does general semantics play a role in combating this problem?
Well, general semantics would say, well, if a person is anti-Semitic and they're interested in general semantics, I would hope that if they learn it, they would question, as if you're philo-Semitic, you would just question your basic foundational principles. Well, is this actually the case? Are all the people I'm throwing this, all people in one category? Are they all like that? How many people do I know? I mean, sometimes people who are anti-Semitic have not even met a Jew. It's just that in that community, there's people are talking against Jews, and to be part of the group, you do the same thing because many of us, or most of us, I suspect, want to be accepted by the groups we're around. So that's what you do. But if you are a student of general semantics, you say, well, maybe there's more to this than meets the eye. Maybe I should, see what the other arguments are that are not just anti-Semitic. I mean, are all Jews like this? Do they really control all of this? Where am I getting my information from? How reliable is that information, et cetera? So I think general semantics has a big role to play in this, and of course, it's getting a person to actually look at that. I mean, so we all have defenses, and it's getting a person to even acknowledge that it's a defense and not a fact. That certainly is a barrier. But if you can do that, general semantics, I think, can play a big part in having a person question their assumptions in that area.
Well, and perhaps that brings us to politics as well, because there is a political component to anti-Semitism, and scapegoating has often been a useful tool from those seeking power. And you write about politics as well in this third volume of Sensible Thinking.
Sure, I do. And the reason I wrote about it, it's interesting, and you know this, of course, is the Institute decided they were going to commission a book on general semantics and politics, how general semantics relates in some way. So the call went out to come up with a chapter or paper on this subject. I think etc. actually did an issue on general semantics and politics.
2 issues.
2 issues. There you go. And so I decided, okay, that'll be interesting to write about that. And of course, one thing I like about writing, and I'm sure the same thing with teaching, is you get to really learn more about whatever subject it is you're interested in. It's one thing to have an opinion, but if you have to write about something, you just can't, unless you're a very famous person. Okay, well, let's hear what this person has to say. You have to back it up with something. So I did more work in that, and one of the things that interested me, because I wanted to write a chapter on that. And there's a book coming out, I guess, shortly. The Institute's publishing a book on general semantics and politics. I recommend everyone to look at that book. Not really for my chapter, but I looked at some of the others and the issues and et cetera. It's wonderful, wonderful. To me, it was just great writing. And so I decided, well, can general semantics help improve, or can help improve the discourse people have around politics? And I thought, that's an interesting thought, because I myself, when I talk to someone who has, let's say, political views that are very antithetical to my own, how good am I at actually really listening, really staying in the conversation, not really thinking, oh, that's so dumb. Oh my God, how can they think that? Very on general semantics. But I've been prone to do that. So I thought, I wonder if there's ways that general semantics could help me to do something which is another general semantics formulation, delay my reaction which is, the formulation in general semantics is, where human beings have this great advantage over the rest in the animal kingdom. We can consciously delay our reactions in situations. You kick a dog, they're going to instantly react. But you kick me, not necessarily. I mean, I kick you back, particularly if you have a gun or for other reasons, or if you call me a name. I could call you a name back instantly, but where does that get me or get you? And maybe the conversation go another way. We can learn more. So the idea of delaying your reactions is such an interesting one, particularly in politics. So I thought, well, what are the other ways you could have perhaps have a more reasonable or sensible conversation? Let's say reasonable conversation with someone who holds different political views. A polite conversation, a conversation where you could learn something and they could learn something and not go away feeling angry or upset. So, so I wrote about that, different ways one could do that using general semantics ideas and formulations. And actually, after writing about it, I really tried harder to do that in conversations, and it doesn't always work. It may not even often work, but it does work sometimes. And it also leads me going into the conversation thinking, well, let's give it a shot. And also, I write that if you see it's not working in a conversation, or you see the conversation is still going south, and there's really nothing you can do about it, switch it to something else. Because, well, this is a personal view, I don't think is politics that important, and people will say this, to lose friendship over. And it may be if that's what you think. But family, people say, well, I can't go to dinners, Thanksgiving dinner with my family. And I always say, well, why don't you go to the dinner? But nobody talks politics. There's plenty of other things in the world going around, millions of things. And it's hard to do. And if people start doing it, you can say, well, we all agree, we're not talking politics. But there are things one can do even in conversations. And I've learned certain things, even in talking to people that I thought I wouldn't be able to learn things from. And my views have changed on things that I thought they wouldn't over time. So, I think it's not a bad idea to really stay open to certain, not just to be an open, everything, I'm open to everything. You have your views, but to see how the ideas that are coming across to be more, not immediately saying, oh, terrible, no good. I mean, that could be in the end, but at least giving it a shot and trying to delay your reaction a little bit, few seconds, to think about what that person is saying.
And what's your take on the current political situation here in the U.S. today?
Well, it's a mess. But so this is the thing. So that's the thing. I have a chapter in the book on political disunity in the United States over our course of our history. So when I say it's a mess, one might say, well, is it the worst it's ever been? And my answer is no. Why is that? Well, if you date periods of time with disunity, is this the most disunited we've always been? I don't think so. If you go to the 1860s, we actually fought a civil war where it wasn't just on MSNBC versus Fox.
I've heard of that.
Yeah. I think the latest numbers are, because I also did some talks on the Civil War, I think they're up to like at least 750,000 Americans, these on both sides, soldiers physically died, shooting at each other, not just shooting off their mouth, but actually shooting muskets or whatever they were using back then, shooting at each other. So I think we're a lot more disunited then. I also lived, I'm old enough, like you are too, to live during the 1960s. That was a pretty chaotic era where it looked to many that the country was really falling apart with the civil rights movements, with cities, on fire, being killed, where politically, we see what's happened with the political assassinations now. I mean, this is not unique to this time. I mean, in the 60s, we had, Martin Luther King, Kennedy, both Kennedys,
Right.
JFK and RFK, the weathermen in New York. I mean, these are people that are, making bombs to try to, bomb facilities. A few of them got killed because they bombed themselves. So, and even if you look back, even, I won't get totally into that chapter. You should read it and get the book. But the War of 1812, where many of the New England states really weren't into that war, and as a matter of fact, were threatening to secede from that war because they didn't think it was their war. So it was similar to maybe like Vietnam, where people were saying, well, this isn't my war, it's a stupid war. And they met people back in the New England states felt the same way for economic interests, primarily because they were being hurt economically through the war. But they were going to secede, and they barely didn't. And I won't go into why. Read the book; it's a good cliffhanger there. But so what I think about the political situation today is it's difficult. Obviously, we have a president who I think is subsuming too much power in his presidency and not following enough of the rules. But on the other hand, I don't know what's going to happen in the future. People say, well, there won't be an election in 2028, this and that. I mean, I don't know, but certainly it's an interesting time, and I think the president, some of what he's doing, well, most of what he's doing, I think is bad, but some of the problems he's bringing up are real. I mean, immigration is a real problem. I think he's handling it, in my opinion, not well. But I think the fact that he brought up the problem as a major problem, I think redounds to his credit. So that's something that's a good thing, and a few other things where I think he often brings up the issue, which I think are issues that really haven't been brought up enough. But the way he goes about dealing with them, in my view, and general semantics, we big fans of qualifying what you're saying. It's not like this is the way it should be. No, in my view, just like you can think my view is 100% wrong, and your view can be your view. But in my view, he's too extreme often in what he does, and that could be dangerous if it continues, and it really, I think, should stop in many ways. So yes, I think it's a fraught time in American history, but not necessarily the most fraught time in history. And if you date using the general semantics formulation of dating, times in American history, they've been worse times.
Well, and you do address a lot of politics through satire. And I should note that you published a book of your satires via Neopoesis Press and continue to publish satire online. And then you include some satire in this volume as well.
Yeah, thank you. I do. I'm a big fan of satire. My motto is don't aggravate, sublimate. And so I do that through satire, because I could shout at the TV, but it's kind of boring. And it's interesting to take on issues. And obviously, I have a strong feeling because satire is sort of a way of teaching through ridicule. And so, okay, that's that. I mean, I wouldn't do that if I was in a college classroom teaching students. But and also, I'm publishing in a journal called The Satirist. So if people are thinking, I wonder if that's satire, read the title of the journal. I think you can get it. Although it's interesting, I'm in a writers group, and they know it's pretty much all I'm doing is giving them satires. And so when too often, they'll read the satire and say, how can you think that, Marty, when I'm thinking just the opposite of what I'm writing? And my first thought is, how could you think that's the way I think? But then I'm thinking, well, maybe some people just don't get satire. And I'm not the first person to think that. There was, I forget the quote from George Cohan or maybe Kaufman back in the 1920s. They would do these great Broadway shows, many were satirical, and they would say satires will close the show on a Saturday night because half the people aren't going to get it. And I assume when I'm writing satires, half the people, although if they're reading the satirist, they'll get it. But if they get it through other ways, because I send it to people, and many of them don't get it because they hold such the views they hold are so dear to them that they can't see that those views can be made, well, because often I agree with what they're thinking, but they can't see that you can sort of get to those views in a roundabout way. Oh, that's terrible. How can you do that? So anyway, so I enjoy satire. And I have a few satires in the book. Um, Hopefully that'll interest people, that are sort of based on general semantics about how words can fool people, delayed reaction,
Mm-hmm.
generalities. There's one satire on lunch with the American people that I wrote because I listen to politicians all the time on talk shows. The American people this, the American people that. So my first thought is, how do they know the American people? They know a few people. They read stuff. But do they really know 330
Right.
million Americans? So the satire is based on the fact that I take the 330 million people to lunch. I'll buy them lunch, and it goes on from there. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the hook in. But anyway, and also through poetry. The Institute has published a book of poetry of
Right.
mine. Thankfully, gratefully, I am. And some of the poems deal with general semantic subject. I have one on happiness, where I talk about how over the philosophers and others have talked about happiness. What is happiness? What is happiness? And the end of the poem is, happiness for me is a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So I can, zing it down to a specific.
Mm-hmm.
So general semantics, you can use it in so many ways, and actually in so many frameworks. So it's endlessly interesting to me.
Yeah. So, and it certainly is interesting also that you made the decision, in terms of this third collection, to include satire and poetry, where you've previously kept them sort of in their own silos, uh, and not mingled them. I mean, you have in etc., but not in any of your previous books.
Yeah, I think that's a good observation, and I do that to show that you can talk about general semantics in ways. Well, actually, I did in one of the books. You can show that you can talk about general semantics in. You could write about general semantics in ways that are just not like in an essay or an article form. And the book that I really got most kick in writing was The Practical Fairy Tales for Everyday Living, where I sort of took fairy tales or parables and I sort of twisted them to come up with a general semantics lesson.
Mm-hmm.
And that book seemed to probably the most popular of the books that I've written on general semantics, at least from feedback I've been getting from people, particularly people who are teachers,
Uh-huh.
and who say, it's been a very good book in getting my students interested, because maybe the students don't want to read a more formal essay, but a fairy tale, to sort of seduce them into learning about general semantics through a fictional writing. That seems to be something that they found they could do, and so I was very happy with that book.
Well, and you've certainly taken a lot of creative approaches to promoting and presenting general semantics. I'm going to ask you a question now that I hate to have asked of me, um, but I figure let's see what you can come up with here,
Sure.
because you doing a lot of writing and in different genres. So we have all of the essays about general semantics, but you've also written about other topics as well as an educator. And you've written, as we talked about, satire quite extensively, a number of satires, and you've written poetry. What's your process as a writer? Um, and, I think we can, perhaps include in this how general semantics might be helpful for anyone who wants to be or is engaged in writing.
That's a good question. I don't mind that being asked. Uh, my process as a writer, what I do is, I think, because writing takes time, and so if you're going to invest time in something, unless it's for your job and then you have to do it, so you do it no matter how you feel. But if you're doing it volitionally, just on your own, uh, so it's something I think one ought to be the topic one ought to be interested in. And I find I'm interested in so many things that often I will find something I'm interested in. And this is where I love general semantics. And I say, well, I'm interested in learning about, I'm doing something now on happiness. And there's so many ways we view happiness. How can I write about happiness and actually make it a coherent essay, but do it through a general semantics formulation? And so that's a puzzle. And then once I get the formulation, it helps me then go through the topic, and then I actually then can do the research. And I love learning things. And when you write about something, you have to do more deep research than just, okay, let's Google it or AI it or whatever they do today. And so, so once I'm involved in wanting more to learn and have the hook of the general semantics formulation and idea, it's just a matter of writing, and of course, all writing is rewriting. So you do the like most people who write suspect nonfiction books. You first do a lot of research. You ask questions about what it is you're the general topic, and it can change. On the happiness thing, it did change. I was thinking about how can you operationalize happiness, and then after finding that was a little bit too narrow, I decided on, well, maybe I should take it from the angle of happiness, etc. That, the way we think about happiness, sort of knee-jerk, people will come up with, well, this is what happiness is. And then you think about, well, what is the meaning of is? And of course, that's a general semantics formulation too. And once you get the framework for something, then you can process it through that framework. And that's the way I write about it. And everyone has different ways to write. Every morning, whatever they're doing, the desk, the computer they use, etc. But that's tangential. But it's the idea of getting the interest and getting the framework that I think are the most important things for me.
Well, that sounds great. And I think this may be very helpful for some of our listeners. Certainly, hopefully will be. Couldn't hurt in any event. And is there anything we haven't brought up about the book that you'd like folks to know?
Not really. Just as I say before, it's I forget exactly how many chapters there are, but the chapters are standalone chapters. There's some that there's one that has a kind of an interesting. Some of the people in my writing group were a bit put off by it, but I think it's what the fuck, and I talk about the history of an obscene word, and I go over that because one of the Albert Reed, Alan Walker Reed, who's a fellow who I think came up with the derivation of the word.
He was a pretty important linguist at Columbia, and he did some work on obscene terms in the 30s. And I'm curious how that word has changed over the years and an obscene word. So that's kind of an interesting chapter. There are chapters on history. I had talked about language used in the Vietnam War, the rhetoric that was used in the Vietnam War. I mean, so much of war is how it's framed to the public and how it's framed to the soldiers. So I talk about that, and I talk about the Revolutionary War. It wasn't just a war between Americans versus British. There was Americans versus Americans because it was loyalists versus patriots, and Americans versus the Native Americans. It was the British against other countries like Spain and the Dutch, and so it wasn't just a simple way to view the war through general semantics. You can index that war and see different things, and there were other chapters on various other things. You could Google a book and look at the table of contents and see some of the things that might interest you. But anyway, I hope I hope your listeners will somehow obtain the book and look at it, and also learn more more importantly than the book. Because an author, I want people to read books, my books particularly, but learn more about general semantics. There's so much you can do with it. I mean, it's been such a joy for almost 50 years of my life, just knowing it and using it. And go to the Institute of General Semantics website and see what's there. And if you're interested, sort of move around and see what's of interest to you. And maybe you'll get somewhat interested, or maybe even as interested as I've been.
Mhm. And it certainly is part of the mission of the Institute of General Semantics to publish new books in general semantics and related areas, as the Balvin-Perec Center puts it, and other human sciences.
Right.
And particularly general semantics, and will continue to do so. And again, it's really great to be able to include your book, which is available, I should add, both through the IGS store, and for members of the IGS, you can email us and get a discount code for the IGS store, which you can get to via our website or through Shopify. But it's also available through Amazon and Barnes and Noble and online and all of the other major online booksellers, and as well, through various online sources, not just in the US, but all over the world. So, and with all our books, we try to price them as cheaply as possible, so that folks can get a hold of it, and it's available in EPUB format and as an electronic book, as well as in in the good old print that us old folks prefer
Yeah.
to read our books in. And by the way, a really great cover.
I love the cover. Of the three books, my favorite cover. We had problem going back and forth with the cover. So we finally got what I thought. And my wife helped me. I'm not so great with visual stuff, but the cover alone, you can judge a book by its cover. And this book, you judge it by the cover. It's a good one. But before we end up, I just want to thank you, Lance. I thought this was, I've been on other podcasts and spoken to people with questions. I thought your questions were really pretty good and got a lot out of me that I didn't know was in me until I got it out. So thank you very much. And I appreciate all the good work you're doing for the
Well,
Institute. I was a past president. I know the good work I'm doing, but I did. But I mean, the Institute just gone leaps and bounds. We're improving. I mean, we're on so many digital platforms. You can find us in so many ways, in so many innovative ways. There are seminars happening and more conferences happening. So general semantics is just expanding by leaps and bounds, and the Institute's just a wonderful place for people to hopefully join. But certainly the information is there on the website. But I do want to thank you for all the good work you've been doing in the field.
well, thank you, Marty, and of course we all build on the great works of those who came before us. So
Who
I
said that?
very much appreciate
Thank you.
all that you have done for the Institute, and to have the privilege to continue that work on and see where we can take it. But again, it's been great to have this conversation and to talk about really a great new book that we're publishing, and we look forward to. I guess, will it be Sensible Thinking 4? Do you think?
You never know, but we'll see.
Well, we can only hope.
There you go. Thank you. I appreciate it.
In the meantime, there is Sensible Thinking 1, 2, and 3.
There you go.
And you'd be well advised to pick up all three of them if you don't already have them. And if you do, they make excellent gifts, as it's not too early to start thinking about the winter holidays.
For sure. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Lance. You take care. I really enjoyed it. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to our June 2025 episode of Semantic Reactions, featuring author and IGS past president and trustee Martin H. Levinson. If you like what you've heard, or even if you haven't, please consider becoming a member of the Institute of General Semantics if you're not one already. In addition to supporting our efforts, IGS members receive an annual subscription to our journal, etc., a review of general semantics, access to our online and in-person events, lectures, and seminars, and discounts on the books and audiovisual materials that we sell. Regular membership is only $50 and half off for students. Your membership and any additional donations you care to make will help to support our offerings and activities as we work to bring a measure of sanity to the world. The Institute of General Semantics is a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to research and education on a wide range of topics. They include language and symbols, meaning and perception, communication and representation, media and technology, science and epistemology, creativity, and critical thinking. We are dedicated to making the world a better place through practical strategies for improving our semantic environment, individually and collectively. For more information about the Institute and our activities, and to become a member and supporter of our work, please visit our website at generalsemantics.org. That's generalsemantics, one word, .org. And this brings to a close our 34th episode of Semantic Reactions, the official podcast of the Institute of General Semantics. This is Ben Houck, signing off, saying, we hope you'll join us next time. And until then, just remember this simple fact, that the map is not the territory.